Well, for people who are joining this meeting, this is a kickoff of an exploration of something for future versions of Wolfram Language related to drawing tools. And the basic background is we have had this drawing tools palette forever, and very few people use it because it has turned out not to be as usable as we'd hoped. So let's take a look here. So the idea is, just like if we have an image, right? If we have a random, how do we get a good random image? Let's say 400, 400 here. If we click the image, we get up this attached cell here that gives us various tools, which I have to say I think are pretty useful. Comments from people? I mean, I think this pattern seems to work fairly well. We don't support this in the cloud at this time. And Matt, I don't know if you know anything about that effort to support that in the cloud.
We haven't had it as a priority.
Right. Is it known to be very difficult, or what's the issue?
I don't think we ever looked into it. I could forward that off and we could look into it.
Fine. Okay.
There hasn't been a lot of interest.
Right. I mean, my guess would be that it's not difficult, but I mean that no individual part of it is hard, but that there's probably a lot of stuff that it does that isn't supported in cloud yet.
Right. Okay, but let's talk about yes, I agree that an attached cell is kind of the only way this is going to work. But, and clearly there are various different attached cells that we might want, depending on whether it's, I would imagine, and I don't know if this is correct, that, that this could have a different attached cell for something like,
right. I mean, there would have to be some, recognition, some identifier that says that this is, a plain graphic versus the output of plot.
Is there, in fact, indication in the? It's certainly indication at the level of the front end. Whether there's indication at the level of the symbolic expression, I'm not sure.
I mean, if I looked at the boxes, I could probably tell you whether it was or not.
Well, we can clearly have.
But if we wanted different attached cells, I would do something that would make it crystal clear that this came from a viz function rather than.
What's that?
What's
that?
A bunch of points.
I understand, but it's compressed in that way.
Yes, that's just a matrix.
Okay, what's all this stuff here?
That's some theme stuff leaking in, I think.
Okay.
One of my wish list items is to clean up the options of the viz functions so that they aren't quite as verbose.
Well, okay, but so one of the things we can certainly do is we can assume that we know what the source of the graphic was, and that we can adjust we can sort of softly adjust the drawing tools, just like we adjust the suggestions bar based on where the graphic came from.
Right. I mean, and it may be that you don't even want to do it, graphics versus plot, but based on other signals, like does it have axes in it?
Well,
and then you adjust based on that, which is the sort of thing that the suggestions bar does, I believe.
Yes.
Okay,
but so then.
It's an
all right,
interesting version of that graphic.
Which?
The red disk is much bigger in your notebook than it was when I sent it, so I'm not sure what's happening there.
Okay, but so there's. Let's just get the bigger. Well, wait a minute. That's a cell that doesn't open. There's nothing there. Okay, so let's write down. Do we already have this information already in another place? The list of what we are trying to achieve with the new drawing tools. Did we already make that list? Anybody know?
Not that I know of.
I'm pretty sure I did that already. But okay, but let's go ahead and make the list. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So add labeling to plots. That seems to be one thing that one wants to do.
Mhm.
Okay. Let me just save this away somewhere. Hold on. Anybody know where I'm saving these? Nope. Okay.
No, I do not.
Okay. I'm going to create a folder for drawing tools.
Okay.
Okay, adding labeling to plots. So one of the issues there is when you add a label, you often want to point to a particular thing. You know, various kinds of constrained drawing are needed. Okay, actually there's a 0th thing, which is place text, etc. in a canvas. Okay, and
Right.
that's
And so, for
particularly
example,
easy for presenter tools.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
That's a very that's like I'm making a, you know, I start a presentation here. I say new new presenter notebook, boom, and then I do one of these and I say create, and now I think I had, okay, now what I want to do is I want to start typing. You know, what am I typing here? Well, that's not what I wanted at all. I want, so let's say I want a section here, but actually I don't want a section here. I want instead, why was that typing slowly? Oh, don't tell me this is still slow. Whatever. I just want a to put down a drawing, a graphic type thing here, and I want to put my words as a soup all over this canvas. Am I making sense? Yeah. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. I think you have very different ideas of presentations than I do, but
Somebody needs to report that bug. I clicked there. I got that. Matt, do you have that?
So yeah, you clicked.
That? I clicked in here. I clicked there after selecting the text tool.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh God, it doesn't even work. So anyway, so that is supposed to be, but it's not working, typing text in there. Am I making sense? Right? You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, it probably did work, but not in the most useful way.
Well, in a way that I can't see it is not a useful way.
Right. I mean, so try dragging out a rectangle.
My God.
Whoa.
It just crashed.
It did.
Wow, that was spectacular. Hasn't done that in a long time. Okay, well, that's not very pleasing. Whew. Oh, don't tell me this thing is also not logging into the cloud properly. No, not that bug again. Matt, you've seen this bug. I don't have DocuTools up. That's not the excuse.
Okay.
Is Matt with us?
No, yeah, I'm with us. Yeah, I mean, I don't deal with this dialogue, but I could, yeah, I'll find.
I know you don't deal with this dialogue, but you do deal with the cloud interaction.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. Okay. Well, I could try that again, and we can see it crash again. But you understand what I was trying to do. I was trying to do what you can do trivially.
You were trying to do
PowerPoint.
free-form text.
Yeah, I was trying to put text somewhere in my canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's a really common thing to want to do. You define a size of canvas. So the workflow is define a size of canvas, then place objects in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that will turn into, you know, underneath that will become a graphics of blah, 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 blah with an image size.
Right.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's keep going here. So the use cases that I know of: place text in a canvas, scribble an arbitrary picture. Okay, that's in the category of just use,
Right. I mean, there's two main workflows, right? One is create something entirely from scratch, and one is mark up something that pre-exists.
Yeah, okay, so let's mark those down. So these are really from scratch, and these are annotation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another thing we might want to do is create a geometric image or diagram.
Mm-hmm.
And in the annotation section, what we might also want to do is tweak a diagram by moving stuff around.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, what other use cases do we know of?
On the annotation side, you want to be able to take something like list plot and select one or two points and make them bigger or colored in some way. So a modification of a generated content.
So that's changing styles.
A generated, modifying elements of a generated plot, which I think is very similar to add labeling to plots. But modifying elements, actually, maybe it isn't the same thing, because that's easier. I mean, one of the issues with adding labeling is, yes, actually, this is a better way to think about it. Labeling could be done with callout, etc. Right? Actually, that's a much better way to do it, because one of the issues we've had here, this is in fact stupid, and this is one of the long-term issues, is that you say, I want to put an arrow to that point, right? But then somehow you regenerate the plot and the arrow is gone.
Right. You want to capture the modification.
Right, but so then this is not obvious how you would do that here, because it's a question of how do you write back the style change to the plot. See what I'm saying? Because in John McClune's scenario, we had something like let's say we had our list plot array, prime 20 or something. Okay. And now we want to pick that. Okay, so if I go in here, I might be able to select, God knows how to do this, that point there. Okay, now what can I do with that point? Chris, what can I do right now with that point?
You should be able to drag it.
Well, what about, can I change its size? Right-click it.
Right-click, no, but if you have the palette open, you should be able to. I mean, if you can't, then that's an obvious shortcoming of the.
None of us know how to do this. I mean, none of us. That level of drill down that I had to do there was pretty weird. Okay, so I've got that selected. Now let us
open the points
and try dragging the size, and probably still did all of them.
I didn't do a squat. It didn't do anything
other than make them disappear.
The opacity is set to 0 for some reason.
Why? We have no idea, but now we've not selected the points. All right, let's regenerate this. Now. Okay, so I don't even understand what that selection state is. Does anybody understand that?
So click one of those points.
Okay, so now I've got the opacity set. What the hell? It just unselected. What's it doing? Okay, why did it unselect there?
That's a compound object, a single point array, and the inspector may have never been implemented for elements of an array.
All right, okay, well, let's pick the whole array then. Yeah. Is that the whole array or not?
Click outside the graphic. Now double click inside and click once on a point.
I did. Nothing happened.
Okay, double click a point.
Well, no, I've got to get into that weird gray state, which I don't understand.
That means the selection's inside the graphic.
Okay. So I single click one point.
Yep. Okay, now use the inspector. There you go.
Magnificent. Well, I've never known how to do that before. Okay. I mean, whatever was going on there was completely obscure in terms of giving me feedback about what was happening or any of that stuff.
Well,
Mhm.
so it may not be by design. This code has not been very actively maintained.
I was going to say that palette, so far as I know, it hasn't been changed since version 6.
Right. Okay. Well, that's fairly modern. That was what, 2004 or something? Probably 15 years.
7?
Really? Was it that late? Did it take us that long to get version 6 out? Okay, in any case, no matter. Did it really take that long? I don't think so. Anyway, whatever. Okay, so the question here is, so now I've done this. Now I want to regenerate my list plot, and of course it's going to go away. Right?
Mhm. You'll still have the modified version.
Yeah, I understand. But you know, this is the question of how much of the modification do you want to keep? I mean, it's the same thing if I were to have something like a list. Okay, let's say I have, you know, a list here, range of 20, and I go through and I select that thing there, and I go to format and I say color, and I say purple, right? Well, that's purple, but now if I evaluate it again, it'll go away.
Mhm.
But I think what we want for plots is, I mean, okay, so to be clear, you know, one of the important things here is that how do I put, in this case here, if I want to say callouts, if I want callouts on these, if I just map callout onto all of those. Okay, interesting. All right, so now let's talk about that case, right? So let's say I want to add to one point here, I want to add a callout, because I can imagine that being a real thing.
Mhm.
Okay, but what I ultimately want is to have that reflected in the original list, in the underlying list.
Right. And so, can I speak for a moment?
Yes.
Okay, so the two cases we're looking at here, you know, are sort of in some ways very similar. You know, changing the style, you know, when you made the points bigger versus adding a call out. You know, so they're both modifying the output of list plots. That said, there are potentially very big differences between them. In that when you changed the size of the points, that was changing something that's sort of deep in the output of the list plot and tied into the structure that list plot generated. If you come through afterward and add a call out, then potentially that is possible to be done, you know, sort of in a way that is outside of what list plot actually generated. And so it may be easier to capture.
Well, I don't think that's true, because plot style is a way of annotatedly changing all the sizes of the points. So we've got a similar issue here. Look at this case, okay? You've got the viewpoint of this thing, right?
Right.
And, you know, I can do Shift-Enter here, and I will preserve that viewpoint.
Right.
But now, if I want the viewpoint, I mean, I guess I can say.
Well, I mean, I think the better example is not to do Shift-Enter on that, you know, polyhedron, but to change it to a different polyhedron in the input cell. So if you change octahedron to sphere.
Yeah. No, I want to do an icosahedron, actually. But anyway, whatever.
Okay. I mean, it will still have that viewpoint when you do the reevaluation. Why didn't it?
No, it didn't. It didn't. It
doesn't. Sorry. Okay, fine. It's because when you did it, it turned it into an input cell. So if you rotate that and then change it and reevaluate.
Okay, that's an interesting behavior. So in other words, so that's an interesting and not obvious. I mean, it's boy, what is the okay? So that's a question of there are these cases where okay, so let's some principles here. When you've tweaked an output, then you overwrite it, do the options survive? Right? Now, let's look at a case of that, another case of that, okay? So if we do a random, actually I have a question about this. I don't know how this will work, but let's say I do this. Okay, that's a certain size. Now let's say I resize that. And
It should be the same small size when you reevaluate.
It is. Right. So what is preserved? So just so I understand.
Basically image size and the view options.
Okay. Image size and viewpoint and what else?
I'm assuming all the view whatever, which there's half a dozen of.
But these are only preserved if the graphic or graphic 3D is the only thing in the output.
Okay. Preserved if they are top level, if the graphic is top level in the output. I mean, to be perfectly honest, this is kind of a hack. I mean, it's a very useful hack, but it's kind of a hack. I mean, so in other words, what you're telling me is, if I were to do the same thing here and I were to say, table, this, let's say, I don't know whether I should work with this, comma 3, and then I were to resize that one like that, and then I were to regenerate it, it won't keep it.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Okay. I'm going to break this out.
So something I was just thinking about is from a user point of view, rather than worrying about the implementation, is the reversibility question. Because you can imagine with that kind of rotation, it'd be very easy to expect to be able to go back to something that says, show dodecahedron viewpoint goes to whatever you manually rotated it to. So you could recapture what you did by hand in code. But if you look at your example from earlier about the list plot, there's an obvious problem with that reversibility, which is
you can't get that information out.
Well, you could, but the question is, what do you want? Because what you might want is to get a list plot 1, 2, 3, callout 4. So that might be what you want, but you might want list plot of the array of prime numbers with a map at position 4.
Right. So look. To me, it seems like the following is the case. One could imagine that the inspector here can pick out the options in some way that, I mean, just like the image inspector has a way of, picking out in the coordinates tool, for example. And by the way, look, there was a bug there that just came up when I hit the image inspector.
That's
okay.
I can investigate that.
Okay, so anyway, we've got.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi dropped out while I was talking there. I don't know if I was in the middle of anything useful when you lost me there.
I don't know. It depends what you were saying.
I don't know when you lost me.
Okay. So look, this is a case where, whoops, what the heck happened there? This is a case, you saw what it did there. It was a way of pulling out of the annotated object certain information.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I mean, I could imagine, just like here, I could get pixel values out. I could imagine going into one of these plots and being able to extract, being able to say, for example, I mean, the very most obvious thing is I point at that point, what are its coordinates? I mean, we don't even have that. We have that.
I mean, we do. Hit period.
Okay, what does that do?
I mean, that gives you a view into the coordinate system for the graphic.
But it didn't copy anything.
It didn't click.
Okay. So you're saying I hit period. Whoops, I go into the graphic. Wait a minute, what does it say there when I'm in the graphic? Double click to edit.
Right. Yeah. So if you mouse over the crosshairs in the tools section of the drawing tools palette.
I'm so nervous about hitting this because I think it's going to crash everything. Hold on 1 second.
It's okay. If you crash, we have the recording of the
meeting,
and we'll have Matt regenerate the notebooks.
Right. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, so I got that tool.
And so you click Command C, and then it pastes, and there's an annoying bug.
You'll want some degree of snapping as well.
Oh,
though.
that was not an annoying bug. Okay.
Snapping in what sense? In the sense,
Well, because if you hover slightly away from the center
Yes.
of the point, it doesn't give you the point. It gives you the the slightly away position.
yeah, which is kind of stupid, right? So I mean, there's a desires, right?
Right,
know,
and making that functionality more
Being
visible
able to
one of the key things
Right.
is high on my list for the new.
Okay, so look, being able to get data about something you see in a graphic out.
So actually, that's the thing that Brett and I were working on last. We can get all of the options and then the object itself. by
Okay.
just clicking on it.
Right. I mean, so one of the things that you see a lot in like text editing apps, like page layout sorts of things, is the ability to copy and paste styles.
Yeah, I've never been a big fan of that.
Right. Although that would be, potentially the, one path for I adjusted, the point size, and I want to reuse that within plot style.
Okay, well, look, the next, being able to get data about something you see in a graphic out. That's the first step of, a graphic was generated. You just want to be able to interrogate that graphic. It's a purely information gathering thing, right? Okay, the next thing you want to be able to do is, which is, again, rather simple, is interactively change the overall styling of the graphic, right? Which I think is again a fairly straightforward thing. That is the equivalent of changing viewpoint, changing size, like existing viewpoint size, etc. And that could be, change the plot theme, do those other kinds of things. And right, so that's okay. So the next level would be modify. Well, add. Let's see. So add styling, etc., to elements of the plot of the graphic. So that's the first time. Okay. So then, e.g., wrap callout around something, right?
I mean, I'm not sure that wrap callout around something is. Well, I mean, so are you talking about something that would?
I'm saying I want to label that point, okay? And I don't want that.
Okay, so insert a callout.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is feasible, and it's potentially, one of the ways of, so we have this thing where we've, struggled to figure out how to add callouts to general graphics without, killing performance things that we like.
Well, that's a different issue, which you need to figure out. But
I mean, absolutely, the drawing tools could be, taught how to insert callouts.
Well, at least then the final thing is adding elements to a graphic. I mean, adding elements to a graphic, moving elements in a graphic. And then, for that matter, deleting elements in a graphic. Right? And when I say graphic, we might want to break that into the case of a plot versus a pure disembodied graphics thing. Right? Okay, so let's look at these.
Do
One of
we
the
want to distinguish in the idea of moving and deleting elements between elements that are purely aesthetic, like where the callout is, versus
right.
moving the
That's-
point itself, which is faking the data?
Right.
Another item would be aligning elements in graphics, things like
Okay.
snap to and grids.
Yep. Okay. So hold on a second. Aesthetic, but I think that's a different. Okay. So wait a minute. Moving, let's say content elements. Well, add content elements to a graphic, but before that is basically add aesthetic elements to a graphic. Add or modify. Okay, what do we mean by an aesthetic element? E.g., move the position of a callout. Or a legend, etc. Right? Which is different. This is moving content elements in a graphic. Quotes fake the data. Obviously, that's not the real reason one might do that, but you know that's what that comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So these are really things. These are all things related to our modifying pre-created graphics / visualizations. And by the way, I don't think we're even talking about. I mean, you see that there's other things here. Like, for example, if we had a graph plot, we might want to move around a point in a graph. See, that's a quite separate thing. That's a oh boy. I mean, I think we're not considering that at this time. Oops.
I mean, strictly speaking, I'm not really considering a lot of that stuff at this time. You know, the first priority is to get something that is more, visible and accessible.
Yeah, and not completely silly in terms of what. Okay, so this is modifying pre-created graphics, but again, there is the completely different issue of blank canvases. Okay, and maybe we should break those apart. I mean, the question is, how do you get? So we had a thing, did we not, called Create Canvas? Did that ever get added?
It's still in proto builds.
So that never got added.
It never got completed.
Oh gosh. Okay. So one piece there is the Create Canvas. So are you saying that's in the prototype build?
There's a Scribble version in the prototype build that doesn't give you any choice but to draw a line.
Okay, so let's take a look at that. Oh gosh, this is so broken. Well, now it's going to work. I don't understand why that worked there. Okay, so now what you're saying is,
and I don't know if anyone's looked at this for some number of months or possible years. So
I evaluated it last week, but that's about it.
Okay. Okay. Well, that was kind of nice. I mean, that seems useful to me. I mean, that's so the outer boundary of that canvas. How do I resize? So what does the outer boundary mean there?
Well, that orange solid boundary just means this is a special graphic. This never got to the point of going through graphic design, but that was the indication that I chose in the implementation that this is a canvas.
Well, I like this. I think this is useful, and I think that's a okay. So this will be a thing that is the analog that might have a button in presenter tools that then allows you to start putting text in. So that's a quite separate thing. This comes up as a Scribble tool, but you want it to be able to have, this create canvas would have then an attached cell, presumably, that lets you, or a sidebar that lets you pick the tool. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
In the general case, yeah, that seems sensible.
Divergent color function.
Right. So, okay. All right. So, I mean that. Okay. So, look. Let's imagine that these are our two main design goals: modifying pre-created graphics and blank canvases. Okay.
Mhm.
Let's look at what we didn't do there. The thing we haven't done there is creating geometric diagrams. Okay, which is yet a separate thing. Well, I mean, then we've also got creating molecules and things like that. Actually, we've got.
Right. I mean, there are lots of domain-specific visual or graphics objects that we have these days.
Right. Okay, but I mean, the geometric image case, I personally think that one of the use cases for that will be, well, okay. So one case that we might want to have, if we say, what is it? Geometric scene. Okay, so let's imagine. Oh, I don't know why I'm doing this in the prototype. Let me just pick an example here. All right. So let's say we have. Can we have a more non-trivial example? Okay, there's a non-trivial example. Okay, so let's go here. Okay, so this is what I would presumably want here. I generate that scene, and then I want to pick up C and move it around with that constraint. Chris, that would be for you. Right, Chris?
Yeah.
So maybe you could just show us, because this is another case that I think is of interest, right? Okay, so there's hold on a second. So this is blank canvases, and then there's geometric drawing, of which one possibility would be to take an object like that and modify it. And then so one case here is modify with underlying constraints. And another case is draw from scratch. And maybe those are combinable. And draw from scratch involves a lot of snapping, I would think. Does it make sense to people? I mean, e.g., okay. Let's have a quick look at some comments on the live stream, and then Chris, maybe we could go to take a look at your demo.
Okay.
And I want an understanding of how what you've done relates to this kind of geometric assertion language. But let's look at some things on the live stream here. Carl comments, he often looks at images that are many megabytes, and the front end doesn't perform well with a dozen images of that size in a notebook. I don't know whether anybody, Lou might want to comment on that, whether the 64-bit stuff will have affected that, or what the reason for a notebook to grind to a halt when there are many big images in it is.
I can't speak definitively on that. No, I mean, file size comes into, the size of the boxes comes into play. The 64-bit should alleviate that if there were memory conditions, but I'm not sure that there are.
Right. I mean, I've certainly routinely, I used notebooks as scrapbooks, so to speak, and put images and lots of images, and it works up to a point. And then one of the issues is inserting in the middle of the notebook gets slow. That's something we should actually ask QA about, given that the 64-bit stuff is being added. Let's ask them to assess that.
I'll mention one other thing that I've noticed by looking over someone's shoulder. They were interacting with an image that had far more resolution than they thought it did. They thought they were working with a 512 by 512 image when really it was 4K by 4K or something.
Yeah. Right. Well, and the fact that we don't give any indication of that is interesting. You have no way to know that it's a super resolution image. And actually, there's a certain argument that in this tool, that it should say something about the size of the image. Maybe.
Well,
it probably does under the I button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's not. I mean, it's one level down, and
Well, what we could do is have a hover indicate the size of the image, but maybe that would be annoying. Maybe it would be worth putting in if it's a hyper-resolution image, and not worth it otherwise.
You only care if it's substantially different than is displayed.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Right. I think that will be an interesting thing to do. To have something which gives you the resolution if it is not self-evident. I mean, in other words, if I do an image, if I make an image here that is like a an 8x8 image, okay, and then I go and I blow it up, it's self-evident what that size is, right? The only case that isn't self-evident is when the thing is hyper-resolution. Anyway, that's something for Shadi's group to suggest.
I was going to say, long ago, we had the thing that showed up on the cell bracket to show you how much memory each cell took.
Yeah.
I'm not actually suggesting we bring that back, but
Does the status area do anything now?
It does not.
That we could, and I'd say we do
I was gonna
percentage
say
probably.
mouse over doesn't give the dimensions or something.
Yeah.
Well, so the main point there is just know what you have if it's very big.
Or even just showing percentage, even if it's smaller, I think is useful. 50%, 500%.
What do you mean?
Well, showing the percentage scale instead of the pixels is just as useful.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe to you, right? I mean,
Right. I mean, if you right-click on, does it show up under magnification, or does it
Percentage again? Yeah.
Yeah, but probably only if it's one of those
give the
fixed sizes.
that's a different magnification. That's not the magnification. That's not the implicit pixel rendering size. That's the magnification in the notebook. That's not the amount that the image was demagnified to display.
It would be, right? If it reflected, it'd be the same thing.
Right. If you right-click on it and set it to 50%.
Yeah, that's the same as dragging it to 50%.
Well, that seems unconvincing. Really? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's the local magnification.
Yeah, inside of image, inside the image object.
Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, so look, there's something for user assistance which will be a combination of the following things. One is maybe there's something in the cell, some cell bracket thingy that shows you large memory cells. Maybe there's something which shows you the size of the image, either on click or somewhere.
Yeah, the cell could have a separate magnification from the image. I'm not sure how that would interact.
Right.
I like it attached to the image seems better, or on hover, you're related to the image.
Right. Okay. Let's go on from this point. But that's something for user assistance. Okay, Matt, if you're dealing with notes here.
Yes.
Okay. Mohammed says, I noticed that TextGrid does not typeset if I deploy an interface as a cloud object with TextGrid as output. I'm pressing a button in that interface. Is that an issue with TextGrid in the cloud? I think that's a completely separate set of people. But Matt, that would actually be for you. Does TextGrid work in the cloud?
TextGrid? I'm not familiar with TextGrid.
Well, TextGrid is the textual version of, TextGrid is
I would expect it to. Grid works in the cloud. Although,
I think one of the points here is that this is editable.
Right, in cloud, this is a giant feature I would love to have in the cloud, and
Yeah, but this is also relates to table view and so on. So I'm not quite sure what the complaint. I mean, if I say cloud publish that,
it should render just fine. I use grids in the cloud all the time.
What? Oh, I see. Percent wasn't the right thing. Yeah. Okay. Next up. George is asking about high school geometry constructions. That's what we're about to talk about. Sandra is asking, if you make changes like adding lines, can you also get the code back? Like the original code with an epilogue or prologue added? Interesting. So that's an interpolation between that's sort of an interpolation between some of these cases. So the idea of adding an epilogue is, yeah, so this one, you know, that thing here, you know, could work by adding an epilogue. But certainly this modifying, adding styling can't work that way in our current setup, right?
Correct. And adding elements, by adding an epilogue may also not work, depending on, especially if you start doing things like changing the Z order.
Yes.
Also, if your plot range is set to something like show all, then am I right in thinking the epilogue isn't going to affect that?
Good question.
Don't remember off the top of my head. I mean, there
Yes,
are
you're right, as far as I can remember.
limitations.
If you
to
add something, you want it to expand to show the whole thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, probably what I would do more likely is, if we start with, the output of plot and we start drawing stuff on top of it, that what we draw would be marked up in some way.
Well, that relates
that allows
to
us to separate it from.
Look, we've got two reasons to want layering immediately. One is layers are useful and you can switch them on and off and things. Another is being able to imagine doing an optimization where you can leave, in a dynamic, you could leave one layer fixed and just have all the action, all the game characters running around another layer. Did that make sense?
Yes, although I don't think you need layers for that.
Well, the alternative is to use object graphics, but that's a whole different construction. It's easier, actually, if you do it with layers. You don't have to have handles.
If you just structure your dynamics properly, you don't need layers for good performance.
Right, that's what I meant. But
and how would you structure them?
What is object graphics?
Well, it means you have a handle.
Okay.
Your Mario has a, it's like a DOM element type thing. It just has a, it's the way that basically games have worked forever.
Right.
As long as you have dynamics closely wrapped around the things you want to change, only those things will be affected and the other things are essentially constant.
Although if you have 100 characters, cartoon characters or whatever, you don't necessarily want 100 dynamics. If it may be more efficient to update them all at once.
Yeah, but I don't think layer solves that problem.
Probably not.
Okay, the final point.
Refresh, wouldn't you?
What's that?
Would you just have to wrap them and refresh and then the appropriate option?
No.
No? Okay.
Okay. Carl on the live stream makes another point, which is we should think about touch screens and styluses, which we're actually not thinking about mostly. Because maybe we are. I mean, a stylus is just the whole point about a stylus is it makes something like, the Scribble Tool more natural.
Well, and depending on the stylus, it gives you, they can read how hard you're pressing down and adjust thickness based on that as you're drawing.
Sure. Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's a luxury item for the kinds of things we're doing. All right,
yes,
let's take a look at Chris's demo here. Shall I let you share, Chris?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a prototype that I wrote, I think, 10 years ago now. And it imports a GSP, Geometers Sketchpad file, and essentially emulates the kind of constraint solving that Geometers Sketchpad does, which I divined by observing how Geometers Sketchpad works. So this is, for example, a centroid construction. Here is, this is essentially, this is what, if you imported a GSP file for this construction, you would get this kind of input.
Okay, so show us what it does.
Okay, yeah, so you can grab any object here and, it behaves.
Okay, Dan McDonald, who's the compare this and what you're seeing with what we now have.
Well, so the problem with doing something like this for us is if there's a am I muted?
No, we can hear you. No, we can hear you. It's fine.
The problem with doing something like this with our stuff is if the say the centroid is defined to be some point that has some other relations it has to satisfy. It's not so simple.
Yeah, but obviously, if it has too many relations, you can't do it.
Right. So for something like this, I think James has tested out putting in geometric scene inside a manipulate, and it kind of works some of the time. So
what does kind of work some of the time mean, and why does that happen? In other words, this is, if we look at the specification here, obviously it's syntactically different, but it's the same type of thing, right? Something is the midpoint of this and that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is very similar to a geometric scene.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is when it kind of works some of the time is it'll work on a simple enough scene. It would probably work on this. One other thing is the constraints generated by the geometric scene are tailored for use in find minimum, which might not necessarily be optimized for directly.
Fine. So there would have to be retargeting of those constraints for this.
Right, but theoretically, yes, this should be doable with just
right. So I mean, Chris, you have some language here that describes the constraints, right?
Right. Yes.
Can we see that language? Did you make a list of the primitives in it?
I don't know. I mean, here's the examples. This point on object. I guess that's the main thing here. There's midpoint.
Yeah. Okay. Have you seen the new geometric primitives?
Some of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a significant restriction in Geometers Sketchpad. You cannot add multiple constraints per object. So in Geometers Sketchpad, you create a construction by drawing. Every time you create a constraint, that's coupled with drawing an object. So there's a one-to-one correspondence between constraints and objects. You can't go back and say, add this constraint to these existing objects, which means you cannot have multiple constraints apply to a single object.
Dan, can you comment on that? Do you understand that? I mean, that is vastly simpler than what we're dealing with.
Right, yeah.
So Chris, you're saying that you can't have a point that's the midpoint of two different lines?
No, because you create that constraint by saying, here's these 2 points, give me a point which is the midpoint of those 2 points.
Right, so
you can't go back after the fact and add another midpoint constraint to it.
Right, that's the magic of our geometric scene stuff is we can do that, and it's it is not particularly easy, which is why things like that would probably not work in this sort of
right. So what you're telling me is there's a set of things which are reasonable to do in constrained drawing, which are these one constraint things. Geometric scene is more general than that.
Right.
Okay, and it may or may not be possible to unravel something. I mean, it's like a triangularization of some set of constraint equations or something. Can you unravel it into, or maybe it's even more extreme than that, can you unravel it into one constraint per object or not? If not, well, maybe we don't do interactive drawing on that.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, look, first step is...
okay, sorry. Well, I would say is at some point in the kind of the geometric scene computation process, we create a dependency graph to look for cycles for
Yeah, I understand. So if it doesn't have a cycle, if it's a simple graph,
right? If it's a tree,
then
it should be doable.
Right. Okay. Well, fine. So I think that the step is to take what Chris has here, and if that's useful, or if you have a direct way to do it, to take these tree dependency things and just make constrained drawing from them.
Okay.
Right? And then figure out if it isn't a tree, what can we do? Because in some cases it will be rigid. You can't move it. Right?
Right.
I mean, this particular case, for rather obvious reasons, is very floppy. Okay, Chris, did you want to show anything else on this?
Well, I have a number of examples, but I don't know. I mean, there's a trace facility too, which is useful in Geometers Sketchpad. So I can select this point and say trace, and now I move this, and you can see how it produces a parabola.
That's cool. So what does that really mean? What is that really doing? That's sampling some number of times per second where that is?
Yeah, it's just leaving it, whoops. Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? It's
just marking each position where the point was.
Yeah, but you're moving it and it's sampling your mouse positions at some frequency.
Yeah, every time it updates, essentially.
Well, how's a poor user to know what it means to say every time it updates?
Well, yeah, this is a prototype, so you might want to do something more exact. And
fair enough.
Production.
Okay. Any other demo items here? These are beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, nothing.
Beautiful.
There's pantograph, they're kind of the same.
Okay. Okay, well, cool. Please send this to Dan.
Okay.
Okay, when did you unshare? Okay, so let's go back here to okay, let's talk about blank canvases to begin with, okay, because I think they may be an easier case. Okay, so I think for Noah, an early target would be to produce a reasonable, attached tool for blank canvases.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about what that needs to be able to do, okay? And whether there are actually two cases, and I don't know. And this is partly a Jeremy question, and so on. There is the case of just free-form drawing, okay? Drawing with lines, drawing with polygon, actually drawing a picture like the one I did here. That's case number one. The other case is essentially free-form text layout, which I claim is an important case as well. Anybody want to comment on that?
I don't necessarily view them as different cases.
I was going to say the same thing, actually. They're the same.
All right. Well,
if we have drawing, does that mean we need editing too to go back and reselect what you did and modify it?
Sure. But
that complicates it, I think. I mean, it adds to it quite a bit.
It depends what tools we have.
Right. I mean, Noah has been prototyping a Bezier tool.
So if anyone has used Illustrator or something like that, it's essentially the pen tool.
Do you want to show what you've done?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Can you go ahead and share then?
Yes. Let me just find it first. And here we go.
Okay.
Right. Share. Desktop one. Okay. That is not that. It is that. Run all code. So I think this is the correct version. So you can just create Bezier paths, right?
So explain what happened here. So that little button at the top is the thing that initiates the pen. Is that right? So if I press it again, I'll get another pen.
No. Oh, yeah. So, yeah. If you deselect it and reselect it, then you can draw more paths. You can also close them as well, which is quite nice.
So what is this relative to what? So we have not had such an object before. Is that right?
Well, I mean, it's a Bezier curve, but there's not a tool that creates.
No, I understand that, but that wasn't part of the drawing tools palette of before.
No, this is new. This is new.
Correct.
It's cool. So to show it again, bring that. I mean, so for example, Jeremy, this is probably a fairly familiar object. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Now, another useful thing related is you take the path that you sketch out and convert it to a Bezier, right? So interpolation of some arbitrary path and kind of fit it, which is pretty useful. It's kind of like pencil to path kind of tool.
Which means like that smiley face you drew previously, you'd be able to sort of go back and change the points.
Yeah, kind of best fit for a Bezier. Yeah, which smooths out everything, and that's really nice.
To be honest, when Illustrator first came out and they first introduced these things, I had a really hard time understanding, how one used this multi-control pointy type thing. But obviously,
there was a simpler version in Pages. Pages 09. They've now sort of changed it, but it was essentially just this, and it was pretty obvious how to use it.
That is nicer than the original Illustrator thing. So that little pivoty thing that's determining the orientation of the curve. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's the tangent points, right?
I see. That's
so
pretty obvious.
Yeah,
that's pretty obvious. But what about the length of that? The length of that bar. What does that mean?
Those are the two. So if I click here and just create like a corner, what that's doing is just creating 3 points, one on top of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I drag, it separates them. So that is the location of the 2 control points, essentially.
So as you elongate that thing, how does it change what's going on? Can you not elongate it? If you pull on, you can elongate it. What does that do? Oh, I see. That is the control points.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then,
nice.
The pen tool is usually coupled with 2 others. One is that it lets you go back and edit these points. And then the other one is that it goes back, it lets you edit the control points, which actually, Brett and I we've got a version, but it's just sort of stuck in an event handler. It hasn't been made into one that can just work on graphics, any graphic.
Okay, very nice. All right, why don't you unshare?
Sure.
Okay, so look, I think, what comments do we have about the direction to go with this? I mean, we just have to make this obvious, and that's really just a graphic design UX type challenge, and it does not want to look like, the cockpit of the Concorde or something, which is what I view this as looking like.
Well, the problem with that is that it shows you everything at once, even the stuff that's grayed out. So that I think that the thing that you want all the time is the tools at the top, and then you just want the contextual controls that apply to the object you've selected. So if it's a line, then you don't need to fill.
Why did we do it this way, Chris, originally? Why did we have this fully displayed thing? Did we not have tabs or something at that time? When was this built? This was built for version 3, is that right?
No, version
6.
6.
Yeah. I can't say. I certainly, if I were doing it today, I would have an inspector that only shows the relevant things. I don't know if that interface functionality didn't exist then, or why I did it this way.
Okay.
It may have been, a step too far for the dynamics at the time or something.
Okay. All right. So then the suggestion is, I mean, what do we think about the single click, double click motif for this tray up here? The locking with double click.
I think once you learn about it, it's useful, but most people will just be confused by it. As you were earlier in this meeting, I think, with the text tool.
Right. So you think it will be better in modern times just to have the thing show that one is the one that's pressed, and if you don't want it, then unpress it.
Especially if it's right up next to the graphic. That seems like quite an obvious indication.
Yeah.
Noah, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
I mean, my one question, I mean, my one concern is, if we have the Bezier tool, how you end one Bezier and start the next.
Let's not worry about Bezier. Bezier is
Right.
an advanced case that's really cool, but I think it's probably in the more tools area.
Well,
Okay.
how do we do it with the polyline at the moment? Is it just enter?
I think it's double click
It's
on
double
a point
click.
at the end.
Double click.
Okay.
To
I mean,
end it off.
I would assume it would be enter.
I'm not sure you have keyboard control at that point. I mean, I'm not sure the keyboard isn't doing other things.
While you're drawing a polyline, you mean?
Yes, I'm not sure that it contextualizes the keyboard to that to the graphic drawing. I'm not sure. You have to look at that. But I mean, I also think there has got to be some indication. Yeah, I mean, look, these things here, arguably, okay, to me, the number of times I draw a circle is small compared to the number of times I draw an arrow, put text in, draw a scribble.
Could you try the scribble? I was wondering whether scribble should be smooth.
Well, yeah,
it definitely should be. That was on the agenda of things to do. It never got done.
Yeah, it gets back to that conversion to Bezier, but you have to figure out to what extent.
Right. Well, you might want, an advanced thing. I mean, we might want the basic tools and then the advanced tools.
So you can hide multiple tools behind the same thing. So, for example, instead of having to have all those different shapes, you can have one shape tool, and then when you press down on it, it gives you the other ones. And like with the pen, there were 3 pens. Well, when you press down on it, you could get 3 buttons.
Fair enough.
Right. I mean, each one's essentially a pop-up menu.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Especially if the tools are a tab next to the graphic, it should definitely just this single and double click behavior should go away. The reason for that originally was we have existing graphics, and we don't want the tool to be set to a circle tool when you're just trying to click in a graphic. You want it always to revert to the selection tool. That's why it was implemented this way.
Noah, did you understand that comment?
Yes, I think so.
But if the tools are attached to the graphic, then for each graphic what tool is in effect. That's not going to be a point of confusion.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I find the fact that this is the selection tool and that it sort of looks a bit like an arrow is pretty damn confusing. And I don't know what that one is. What's that one?
That's an eyedropper for selecting a style and applying it to something else.
I can barely see it. It's okay. Okay. So now, Noah, I mean, thinking about touch, can you do the thing? Yeah, you can do that thing. You just touch it and it opens out, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, the way, for example, Illustrator does it is that you just click and hold. So I think I'm right in saying each button you can do that with has essentially like a little sort of arrow in the bottom right hand corner. Tim, you use Illustrator, don't you? Is that how it does it? And then essentially, if you click down on it and hold it for a second, you get the options.
Yeah, it's got a little like triangle in the corner.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think people would be like expecting to see that. I reckon they'd know what that means.
Yeah, I mean, our user base that might use this won't necessarily have used Illustrator.
No, but it implies more to the tool.
I mean, like Pages does the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
Especially if some have it and some don't, then you're like, oh, okay, well, there's more to those tools than those ones.
All right, so let's walk through this. So in the blank canvas case, we think we have some understanding. I mean, it needs a bunch of UX and design work to come up with something reasonable here. And I think Noah should just go ahead and try and do that. And the goal would be that we would have either we'll have a function create canvas, which, by the way, when we have that function, it could have options that specify things about what tools come up with the canvas, right? And that you might say, well, nobody's going to do it, but actually, yes, they are going to do it, because what was I going to say? Because they might be preparing some environment for other users, so to speak, and they will be perfectly happy to, let's say in some educational setting, they would shut down all but particular, all but particular tools and so on.
So that's stored in the graphics object itself. I mean, because that has to be left over once you've created the canvas and made edits. You want it to stay in that state.
Good point.
I don't think that's difficult.
Okay, so it has to be in the box structure of the canvas.
Yeah,
right. It has to be in there somewhere.
Okay.
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 I mean, there's lots of things that you could imagine Create Canvas doing, like being able to take the non-editable background sort of thing.
Yes, that's right. It should be able to take a background. Yeah, it should be able to take an image.
Right, or another graphic or whatever.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's a very good point. So that you can do tracing and things like that. Right, and arguably then, Create Canvas would have to choose whether to actually preserve that. Okay, so given that I said Create Canvas, then I have that background image there. What actually comes out? If I were to take the input form of that, I would see if I wanted. So one of the considerations of this is the thing I get out, I should be able to Shift Enter evaluate it, and it should be some graphics object. Is that right? Well, I mean, it's got to be a graphics object. We know it's a graphics object.
Right. Well, I mean, the question is, is it a graphics object with head graphics, or is it? I mean, maybe it's still. I mean, because it could be a canvas object that just typesets as graphics.
But
yes, that's true.
If you grab a graphics, from some other source, then it wraps canvas around it as soon as you do something to it.
Well,
if you did Create Canvas of graphics, or Create Canvas of plot.
Actually, what would be nice there is if we had a canvas object, we could have subvalues of that which extract different kinds of things.
But I think you want to start with a plot, right? You don't want to kind of the user to pre-think, I want to make a canvas out of this plot. You just start with a plot, you touch it, you want things to work.
Sure, but it could still come out as as some kind of canvas object, which then could have. Why is my
all graphics outputs would be pre-wrapped with canvas in that case?
No, not all of them.
No, but then this, you would be able to go back from here if you wanted to, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the right way to do it. By the way, my typing has just slowed down immensely, which is probably because of dynamics and the drawing tools, which is really kind of horrifying.
Or something. I was going to say, or something from Noah's, but you don't have any of his at the moment.
No, that was remote through screen sharing.
Whatever the output is as well, you probably wanted to support Create Canvas of dynamic of X in order to pipe that into a symbol.
What?
I might want to
create canvas
of dynamic of some symbol. And then if you, for example, had another cell dynamic of symbol, you'd see it refreshing as you drew.
That's not how I would imagine that working, John. My expectation there is that you would essentially be drawing on top of an animation or something.
I don't understand that one. I mean,
it depends whether the question is, if you have a purpose to reuse this, you don't want to have to be able to, the only way to reuse it being to do shift return on what you've drawn.
Yeah, you want to be able to suck data out of the canvas as it is being drawn.
Well, I'd be satisfied if there was a lag, if it wasn't kind of absolutely real time. But yes, there ought to be some way of getting the thing you've drawn without having to paste it into an input cell.
Right. So in other words, you want to be able to parameterize the content of the canvas. You want to be able to essentially bind that to a variable X that you use elsewhere.
Yeah. So I might do some processing.
I mean, the more that would be, except I'm so put off because my typing is slow here. Create canvas of object of dynamic of X, and then you have somewhere else a dynamic of X that is doing something. Or alternatively, you are, you have a slider that is changing dynamic of X, and that's changing inside the visible canvas. Okay, so by the way, Ethan on the live stream says, study the Sketch app on Mac OS for drawing insights. So that's probably a homework for Noah if he doesn't already know that.
I haven't come across it, no.
Okay. Well, there probably exists. Maybe it just, no, it's probably, what is that? Oh, wow.
I was going to say, it sounds like a third-party app, yeah, which I'll have a look at.
Okay, fine. Okay. All right. So let's just review for 1 second, and we're going to have to move to another meeting, which, by the way, is also going to be live streamed.
Yeah, I don't want to miss that meeting.
Yeah, that meeting is important. But okay. So I just want to come back to a couple of things here. So I think, for Noah, what we need to work on is this canvas thing. I don't know to what extent the symbolic wrapping of a canvas is the right thing. It may be. It may be a good place to start. I really do like the idea of being able to interrogate the graphic beyond just saying what's the input form and pull pieces out of it. And it's an interesting question whether, we have not used subvalues of graphics ever.
No.
And we could.
Mm-hmm.
And they could be used to do non-trivial extraction of stuff. I mean, right now, you have a graphic, you want to find what, the axis labels in the graphic are or something. It's a messy thing. Well, if it's options, it's not so messy. Anyway, that's the thing to think about. The other big thing to think about is the retrieval of information. So okay, the big things I think that are problems here are, are you merely drawing on top of the graphic as a layer, or are you associating your annotations with actual elements in the graphic? Did that make sense? And the simpler case is obviously what we are talking about now with canvases, where you're essentially drawing on a layer on top of the graphic, and the graphic itself does not change. But the drawing tools are obviously supporting changing the underlying graphic.
Right.
And the problem with changing the underlying graphic is what happens to that changed underlying graphic. It's now been separated from whatever code it was that generated the graphic, now doesn't generate the graphic anymore.
These demos of scene programming systems keep coming to mind, where you have the code next to the scene, you can change the code, you see the scene change, you drag something in the scene, the coordinates in the code changes. I can imagine something like that for like a plot output. You select it, you get the drawing tools as well as a plot expression. And then when you do something in the, with the drawing tools, you see the plot expression update. And then,
well, our plot expressions, though, I mean, most of those scene drawing tools, they have, very toy, numbers of elements. I mean, we're not talking about pictures of.
I'm sure it's not an easy problem. Yeah.
No. But I'm talking about the UX. I mean, it's a fine thing. I've seen some really nice things along those lines, even with where you move physical objects and there's cameras watching them and so on. But those are for small numbers of objects. If you have a picture, some realistic graphic, or even a generated data graphic, I don't see that being the same story.
I'm thinking primarily of the case where you have you produce a plot and then you put a call out on a point and you want that to be reflected in the plot command.
Yes, I understand. But imagine you had 1 million points and you want to put a call out on 1 point. It's an outlier and you want to put a call out on that 1 point out of 1 million. That's a messy thing. You're not going to be able to see those 1 million points in plain text. How do you do that?
I presume if it's just 1 point, you have something like an index arrow point. I don't know what the syntax is, but
no. But I mean, why do you want to see the actual code of the graphic? Because it is a way of indicating to you that you can copy it and use it again. But there might be other ways to indicate that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to produce an input expression which is manageable, then it's got to be a small expression. I don't know. Maybe
not really. I mean, it doesn't really. It can be. Look, it can be programmatically manageable, but not sort of edit manageable.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But I think the idea. I mean, the fundamental idea is, how do you get the core expression? Like for example, Okay, the case of adding a call out or styling some points. Okay, let's imagine that you've got a plot and you've got some person who wants to manually. And but by the way, we're talking about plots, but who knows, a geo bubble chart or something. I don't know what we need to also be thinking about these much more derived visualization things, like let's say a geo bubble chart. Let's imagine that you've got your geo bubble chart and you want to click on the cities that you think, you made the geo bubble chart of some characteristic of whether you want to live in these cities or something. Okay. And then you want to click different bubbles. Well, let's imagine you take that geo bubble chart and you want to erase the cities that, for whatever reason, weren't in your criteria and you don't want to live in them. So you want to edit your chart to leave only the bubbles around the cities that you actually care about. Okay. Then the question would be, what is the output from that? What you would like as the output is to treat that, is to just list, is to just get a list of those cities out. Anything other than that is much less useful. Right. So in other words, okay, so here's a way to think about it. There is underlying data that generated the plot. And I mean, this is something we've come up over and over again, that we need to have a linkage between the underlying data and then this becomes essentially an edit of the underlying data instead of a mere edit of the graphics derived from the underlying data. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, what I'm imagining is that there is how expensive is it to keep enough information in, for example, list plot to know what the underlying data was like? And how do we do that? If we were to keep enough information and some tagging, then in this sub-value model, you could edit the plot, you could ask for a sub-value, which asks for the underlying data, and there it is.
Dataset does that. Dataset has a caching mechanism that stores the data corresponding to what you see in the display in an efficient way.
Okay. Well, that's something perhaps to learn from for plot. But I mean, if we could do that, then whatever editing you do here is actually editing of the underlying, you can then extract from that the edited underlying data, which seems like a good way to do it.
Right. I mean, the hard part is figuring out how to do it efficiently.
By the way, somebody is asking if this is just a Wolfram language expression. The answer is yes. Isn't there a thing that says notebook? How do you make that notebook from palette?
Do notebook read of. You might need to evaluate notebooks just to see which the object is.
This is driving me crazy that it's doing so slowly. But
so
okay,
copy the drawing tools, that third one.
Can I just copy it like that?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what do I say? Notebook read?
Notebook kit.
Notebook kit, yeah.
Okay, there it is. So that's the box structure of that thing, which is not is that how it was made, or was it made at some higher level?
It was made by running Wolfram language code.
Yeah.
This was there was code run that output this box structure, which renders as that palette.
Correct? Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, in particular, code is written in terms of like row and button and whatever, and then
it's
it gets turned into boxes and then saved to the palette.
All right. We should wrap this meeting. I think so. Matt, can you make sure to send these things out to all relevant people?
Yep.
And Noah, I think you've got some direction here. Maybe you can think about this stuff. Try and start coming up with things. Does that sound reasonable?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And for those on the live stream who are interested, we are about to go into a meeting about missing data and the handling of missing data. And you're all invited, but it's going to be a different live stream. And we'll be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, thanks all. Thanks for commenting on the live stream. See you all later.
See ya.